Producer is the person who is making things happen. Some indie teams do not understand it. They already have producer. I've never seen agile practices perfectly working in the gaming studio.
Greetings and welcome to the 80 Level Roundtable podcast. In each episode, host Kirill Tokarev invites video game industry leaders to talk about the world of game development. No topic is off limits as long as it relates to video game development. New episodes are in the works, so remember to follow us or subscribe and share with someone you know will also enjoy the podcast.
Hello, my name is Slava. I previously worked in wargaming as a project manager. I was leading the R&D team there. Later on, I joined CD Projekt Red when I spent 4+ years for Cyberpunk 2077 development. And currently, I'm working at Xsolla as director of products, making sure that indie teams have the possibilities and the ways to get funding to make their games happen. This first time I bumped into Xsolla, BizDev and Xsolla guys like 5 years ago. While I'm working at the big companies, all the time I do have a side project I'm working on, and one of them won Unreal Development Contest and won a prize from Xsolla. We applied for Xsolla Funding Club, and through this channel we have found the investor who was ready to put funds into our team. We didn't sign with him because we had disagreement inside of the team if we should do it at this stage or not. However, I've seen that Xsolla actually brought something useful for me as an indie developer. And few years later, when I have already finished the Cyberpunk 2077. When we have finished Cyberpunk, I was thinking what to do next. I could stay in the company, obviously, and continue working on Cyberpunk and Witcher franchises, while I met Eugene from Xsolla, and he said that actually I can do what I'm doing, meaning mentoring indie teams. I can turn what I'm doing into something useful on a bigger scale with Xsolla. So yeah, currently I like what I'm doing because I'm actually helping indie teams to raise funds for their games and get a good deal comparing to many others. So I guess it will be paid out in the future by karma.
We often ask this question, and I think for somebody of your caliber it would be a good one. So why do you do what you do? Like, why do you decide to go into games and not do, IT or do some other stuff?
Well, honestly, before I joined game dev, I was actually working in IT. But to me, it was mostly the need to start over career somewhere. I was pretty young, so I started as a QA engineer. I worked in an outsourcing company for 4 years, and then when I became professional enough, I was invited to join wargaming, and that's how I tagged along with gaming industry. It was all the time the job dream to me, and I was looking for the ways how to enter the industries, but I was failing over and over again. But yeah, after the work in IT company, I got recognized and had my chance.
What were like the major differences, when you were working in IT and then you had this opportunity to work in a huge company like wargaming? What kind of were the first thing that kind of strike you?
That's an interesting question. At the beginning, I've seen no differences, but months after months, the spirit of the way how the games are being developed became more obvious to me, because 4 years in outsourcing company means that you're always focusing on the delivery, you're always focusing on what customer told you to do, while working on the game. You have to do your discoveries on your own. You have to be sure that the team and everyone who is involved in the game development, they are courageous enough, they are smart enough to keep up the conversation, to adapt to the change if they need to be implemented. And the game development appears to be more conscious and focused on what the end customer, the player, needs, comparing to outsourced development when we always had to believe that there is a customer who knows better than you. But yeah, in games it's quite different. No one knows what player needs.
So we have a lot of those conversations with game developers, and I even did a couple of lectures on what advice do they give to people who are just starting out. And one of the things that they said is the following: when you work in games, games are no longer the same for you. You know what I mean? Like if you're a director or like a cameraman, you don't watch the movie, you watch how the movie is made. So how did you go through this transition? Like, because you're not originally a game developer, you worked in IT, and how did you kind of start looking, how did your perspective change on when you're assessing games or playing games? Or like...
Oh, the major change was that at the beginning you think that, oh, it's easy to implement, it's just a simple feature, let's just do it. But every tiny change in the mechanics, in user interface, wherever, leads to another changes in most cases, and you need to probe it over and over and over again. And sometimes the results might be unreliable, but you still need to believe them and build other hypotheses. So over time, you're developing the experience, you know how games are actually done, you get information how much any gameplay change costs, how much costs the change of the character, of the location, whatsoever. And at the beginning, you look at the games and think, well, that could be done better and I know how. After years, you're looking at the games and you're looking at the movies whatsoever, and you're admitting very cool tiny things you have never seen before. So it transitioned over time from being super confident on I know how to do this stuff into wow, they did this stuff in pretty peculiar way, and I'm fascinated by it.
Don't you find it's how, like, my experience when you look at the game development process, it seems like, and I think movies are similar in that way, that it's a miracle that these things actually release, that they are finished and they are launched, because there are so many elements. And like you said, if you want to implement one feature and then the whole system's kind of collapsed or something. And I think there was a talk at GDC where this lady, I think she was from Obsidian or somewhere, and she talked about like those people they really like games, and they think they can do everything on their own, and then they start creating without telling anyone else that they're doing something. They create levels or characters or something, and then it just kind of creates more extra work for everyone else. How do you guys battle this? You worked in Wargaming, you worked in CD Projekt. When does this passion kind of bothers you, it doesn't allow you to go and finish the game?
I would start with an abstract. I would say typically when you're developing the game, you have two phases, pre-production and production. And the level of the art, the level of creativity which is allowed to be put into the game is reducing over time. The closer you are to the release, the less and less additional stuff you can add into the game. So typically when you're developing the game, you're gating these processes by milestones, but even though it's not always working. The trick is that the games is not games, movies, these mediums, they created not by just one person, they created by many persons. And the beautiful part of it is in emergent power of all of these people. What can be done by one person, if you multiply it by 20%, you may have unexpected result. If you have the chemistry inside of the team, in this case, these 20 developers may deliver 100 times more than you expected. If there is no chemistry, it would be lower. So the key trick of working in game development is that you have to trust your fellow developers. You have to find the chemistry with them, and in this case, results of both of you, all of you, are amplifying.
So you acted as a leader in some of the development teams, and the question that I think is interesting not only like for the game development committee, but overall for people in general, because games is now such a huge part of our lives, right? My question is like, who develops games? Like, who are these people that decide to devote their lives to, you know, building mechanics and creating technology and so on? And the question is, I'm trying to understand, because for technical guys, right, for coders especially, I mean, there are so many opportunities. You'd go Silicon Valley, do your own app or something, right? You can go to Japan and work in a bank, just create some boring software for transactions or whatever. And still, I see people fighting for an opportunity to work for this company or that company. So what's like the psychology behind this? Like, who are these people that they decide to work at Wargaming or CD Projekt Red or any other these big organizations that build games?
Okay. I guess it's mostly about the passion. I know developers who are awesome in rendering, they're awesome in building animation systems. This requires a lot of super deep knowledge on algorithms which are specific for this area. And these guys keep evolving in this area, specifically because they want to see how they can push it even better. I have a friend who is regularly writing white papers after each game he has delivered and telling the stories on how rendering can be improved on a C graph. He just wants to share it with everyone else, because this is what he could achieve and he can show it to everyone, so the technology he used can be populated and improve any other games. When we talk about the other type of the developers, animators, 3D modelers, artists, all of them are developers, but all of them are still driven by the same thing, passion. They have something that they want to show, and they have the joy when they see that players enjoy what they have delivered.
So when you have these people who are incredibly passionate and they're driven by this kind of desire to make better games, I'm sure you kind of ended up in situations where there's just so much energy in the room, there's like so much stuff going on, then it's impossible to kind of keep everyone happy, right? So because as with any kind of product that you're developing, you have to make decisions, and sometimes these decisions, they don't, you know, not everyone is a fan of, right? And you and I, we both come from, I guess, like a former Soviet Union kind of scene, where we've seen tons of those teams where they're saying, we're going to build this game, and it's going to be a game, it's going to have open world, and it's gonna have realistic damage, and you can be able to, attack caravans and do all this stuff, crazy stuff. So adding so many ideas that it's never gonna work. And like me in my career personally, I've seen too many of those games. But in your role, you work as a producer, and this seems to me kind of like this role that is often avoided. Like not a lot of people understand what does producer do. And for me, when I think about producer, it's this guy from a movie called The Tail Wags the Dog, like the glasses guy, and then he walks around and he just he has the vision, he gathers some people, and then he makes people work. So my question is, in games, in your role, in your experience, from having all the background, who do you think producer is? Like, what is this person's role on a project?
The answer is actually depends on which company, which country we are talking about, because the definition of production job differs between different companies. While at the same time, there is one thing which is always standing out. Producer is the person who is making things happen, and in this quote, that can mean anything. So let's say at this point, after I left CD Projekt Red, I picked up a couple of indie projects, and I'm leading them as a independent producer. And in this case, my role in most cases is to take what creative talents are working on and frame it into the business, frame it into deliverables, which they can actually finish by some time. And it actually takes a lot of time. Not so many people understand that you cannot just go to the team and say, do this. It doesn't work this way. You're working with creative talents. They are creating these games. You are helping them. So your quest in most cases is to get to understand what the game they're developing and how you can help them to deliver it in its best shape. Then you have to explain it, and then you have to agree with them how exactly it's going to be done. So let's say me as an independent producer wearing at least 3 hats, that sometimes I have to behave as a story doctor because I see that the story we want to tell inside of the game is too huge or too complex, or vice versa, too simple, so players won't like it. On another day, I'm wearing the hat of director, preparing profit and losses file, calculating budget for the game. Sometimes I'm wearing the hat of the business developer, and I'm going to talk with investors, publishers, whoever. Everything to make team focus on what they can actually do the best, creating the game. So yeah, producer is the person who helps the team to achieve the point of the release.
Did you, because you mentioned you worked at like large companies, but you also help indie companies as well. When you have these conversations with guys who are creating their own smaller experience, how do they treat you? Do they sometimes think you're like just like a money grabbing machine that's only here for, make some buck on their shoulders and to monetize their game? Do you see any kind of, because at least a while ago that was kind of the attitude from the indie teams, you know what I mean? When because producer for them was similar to like a marketing CEO or like some kind of publisher, because developers, they live in their own world, their own game, and they feel like if they're building this game, it's going to be successful, either way. People are going to see all the features, all the implementations, and they never even come up with the idea that a lot of people like me, for example, they make their decision whether to purchase this or not based on the whatever the icon looks like on Switch, store, right? So how do you kind of persuade them, or how do you build that need in the team so they understand that the producer is the one who's going to help them, finish it?
Yeah, it starts with the basics, because producer is not just like one guy's job. Producer is a role. Anyone can take it inside of the team. And typically, this is how it starts, despite the fact that some indie teams do not understand it. They already have producer. It's just someone inside of their team who is trying to manage what they're doing, who is trying to build up our long-term plans. So they do have them. And when we arrive at the point where developers want to actually focus on the game, when they understand that actually working on the finance part of the studio is complex, having conversations with publishers is time-consuming, they're getting tired. And that's the moment when experienced producer help comes in handy. Typically it starts with just mentorship, so they're coming to you asking questions, you're helping them with some advices, or vice versa, you're challenging with the questions they would never ask themselves. And step by step, it builds the trust, because you show the developers that you're actually on their side, you're not pulling money out of them, you're trying to help them to make the game happen. And I don't know the other recipe actually, because without trust from the team, you're always going to be just a manager who is chasing people, for their tasks, which is not production job actually.
So when you worked in these smaller studios and the larger ones, as a producer and a part of the team, you obviously saw a lot of challenges and problems that people face. And I think my question is, do you feel like the process is different the bigger the company becomes? Do you see more problems kind of arriving or less? And the question is, what about the way that you manage all that? Like, is it like a flat structure? Do you need some kind of hierarchy? Do you use waterfall, or do you like the safe techniques? What works best for, what size?
Well, I'll start with the fact that in practice, we can imagine the game studio as just a system. My background is that I'm an engineer, and I'm specialized in system analysis. And when I'm looking at any studio, I see that it has the composition of different developers. So the bigger number of the developers, the more complex system is. So that's the first thing. Second thing, when you're working with indie developers, you're always producing stakeholders, because stakeholders are actually in the team. While you're working in a big company, your developers, their creative talents inside of the company, while stakeholders are typically game director or studio director or head of the studio, some other guy. And yeah, sometimes there are conflicts between stakeholders and the team, but that's the thing. You are here to mediate the process, and if someone in the process gets offended, or someone in the process disagrees, it's your job to settle down the conflict, to explain why the decision was made this way, or mitigate some other solution with the director. That depends on the situation. In practice, I've never seen agile practices perfectly working in the gaming studio. At my memory, only Bungie achieved working process in a safe manner, while others trying to implement some practices, sometimes with the success. But yeah, once again, typically every studio is building their own process, because the pipelines of the development are different, engines are different, and that requires different team composition and different skill set.
I think I have like 2 comments on that one. That one of my friends who actually worked with me, and we were both kind of studying for SAFe, and we did this like SAFe Agile training for different roles, but still, like it's mostly the same training. And I was like, wow, this is so nice. This worked perfect. Like, let's just use it, and it's like 40% growth, like faster delivery, all that stuff. And he said, well, it's kind of great on paper, but it never actually works how you learn it, right? And there are very few companies that are actually implementing it and achieve results. And you mentioned Bungie, and I had a friend who worked there, and he said, yeah, they said like developers, they use frameworks that, you know, bring them results. They can use waterfall here and do SAFe Agile there. And Bungie is now different, like I think in that direction. It's like any big companies, right? When you have these teams, I guess, and you can comment on that, like on a smaller scale, you have stakeholders kind of within the team. The team is just a number of stakeholders. What you need to spend less time on is probably clarification and communication, meaning that everybody understands what they're building, everybody understands what everyone is doing, and you know, if I build something that's not entirely like in something, then everybody's, you know, they know who to talk to and they understand what's going on. But what happens if it's like World of Tanks? Good God, this game is like humongous, right? Or any other big title. Let's not take examples from your career, but any, let's say like Elden Ring. Look at that game. It's like, first of all, one of the biggest RPGs ever, right? So much content there, so many elements. So if I make a decision that, you know, the chest is gonna teleport you God knows where in another part of the map, I don't, like, physically, I cannot understand how that studio manages to do it. And any big studio, how do they not lose their shit and just, you know, go around killing each other, because it's just too much to kind of compress into one. So can you talk a little bit about what are like the efficient ways where different kind of decisions can communicate within the team and also outside the team, when game director comes or art director comes and you show him some technique and he says, it's never gonna work because my prop is, let's say, gray, and it's just gonna be lost. Nobody's gonna see it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The thing is that there should be always the point of synchronization. In different companies it works differently. Some prefers to have posted regular playthroughs on a drive and that's it. Someone demands developers to play the game regularly, once a week, let's say, to spend a couple of hours, but you have to play the game to understand and see what's happening in there. Some companies are posting huge posts on internal Confluence, assuming that everyone will read it. But the thing is that the only working way to assure that people will know what's inside of the game is to make them passionate on their change and willing to show it to the others. When one developer is coming in the picture and saying, "Look, I have created the let's say new mechanics of shooting. So it's based on, let's say, freezing time, and you can pinpoint few places you want to shot at, and boom, it works like you are doing it automatically. It looks nice. I want to show it to everyone." And yeah, it should come from the developer.
So you mentioned passion a couple of times when we were discussing, and we think that this is one of the biggest things that kind of unites game developers in general, because that's one of the things why they're doing this in the first place. And when I think about passion, I always think about, I think it was a former PlayStation head who on camera he was beating, and he successfully did so, a very challenging boss in Bloodborne. And Bloodborne is a very challenging game, and he was like dodging kind of his hardware skipping a beat, and you could see that this guy really likes games, and he's like a CEO of PlayStation. He's like a very high-level C-level guy, right? So you might think he's not really interested in game, but he is, and you can see this from the recording. But passion is just kind of like one little part of this.
Basis.
Yeah, it's like part of the base of this formula, like for a successful hire in a game. And when you're looking for talent, when you speak with your colleagues and so on, how do you choose when you're getting resumes? I'm sure when you're working on Cyberpunk, you got like tons of, knocks on the door and people like, hey, I really like your game, want to work with you. How do you make this decision that this person fits and this person doesn't? And if you're thinking about it, to make it easier, like let's think about these hard skills and soft skills that you need to have in order to continue working in big games.
That actually depends on the culture which is in the company. So let's say when I was working at CD Projekt Red, I was hiring gameplay designers, and comparing to many other companies, still 5 years back, we were focusing on the developers who are not only or game designers who are not only the designers and they can build cool presentation and write nice papers, but they can also implement things. So for us was always important that the person who is about to join us has the hard skills we want, and they can prove it with the simple task to implement a prototype. While later on, each person who is supposed to work with this developer should speak to him. And in my case, I wasn't challenging designers with questions on how they execute their job. We were talking about the games. My top 3 questions typically: what the last game you played? Is there anything you would change in this game, and if so, why? And third is how it will impact players' experience. So these 3 simple questions allows you to spend an hour with the developer if he's passionate enough, if he's actually putting a heart in the answer, not just like pulling it out of the nowhere. Yeah.
When you talk about game designers, especially, what are those hard skills? Because I know, like, if you're like a mobile free-to-play, you probably biggest hard skill is your spreadsheet, and then you calculate like lifetime value of whatever and how to loop them in the game. But when you talk about a game like Cyberpunk, that's like there are so many systems there. It's a very different monetization model. I'm struggling to understand what kind of hard skills do you need to have in order to actually start building something like this. It's also super important for our listeners who are, they're still in school. Maybe they're in junior positions somewhere. They don't really know. So if you could explain a little bit, like, what do you need to learn and maybe start practicing that will help you build those hard skills and maybe get in the career ladder.
Right. Typically for me, the best person is the one who has the passion first, who is able to build the language with the others and adapt the language from the studio. That's where hard skills comes in, and being able to receive the feedback. That's when it comes to the soft skills. Those 3 key points, they're necessary for any developer. Why I mentioned language is mostly because while requirements would be different between different professions in different studios, the key thing is that in different companies you're using different language to describe things you're working on. Let's say 2 my first months in CD Projekt Red, I was super confident while I was talking about what we should implement, assuming that the word prefab is exactly this has exactly the same meaning as in Unity or Unreal, but in practice it did not. And that was my mistake. That when I came in, I started immediately operate with the language I knew. I didn't align myself with the others. So the hard skills here is that you have to have at least basic knowledge on how the games are developed. If you have the possibility and courage to open the engine, you should, because the hands-on practice of creating even a smallest, even the simplest game is priceless, because you're starting to understand what kind of language might exist, and then you're coming to another company, you're getting hired, and you have to be ready that most of the things you named one way can be named the other way, and you have to learn how, and you have to adapt to the language they're using. And this is the most necessary hard skill, I would say, and this is something that people typically are taken from the university.
So while we're on a subject on university and kind of achieving those skills, there is a trend in games, and I think game is like one of those industries where you can never sit still, meaning that today it's one technique, tomorrow is another technique. We run a website for artists, and this stuff changes almost every year. Like every year there's some new feature. Like a good example would be, ZBrush. Like you used to use ZBrush all the time to make materials, like even during like crisis times, right? Now you use Substance Designer or Substance Painter, and maybe in 5 years you're gonna start using Megascans or something else where everything's gonna be scanned.
DALL-E.
Or DALL-E, yeah, or AI stuff. So this AI stuff also comes into mind. So how do you advise to young people, and maybe not only young people, but for everyone, how do you adapt in this environment where everything's changing so quickly, and how do you make sure that you're still employable? That's the biggest thing, because if you look at DALL-E, we joked yesterday that interior decorators are no longer necessary, and any billionaire can click something in DALL-E and create his own underwater aquarium bedroom or something, right? So how do you see this progressing in the future with all the tools, with all the AI? Is there going to be a need for game developers in the future at all?
There should be a constant learning. All of the tools, Substance Painter, ZBrush, DALL-E, any other AI tools, these are just tools to make your work more efficient, more faster, more effective from the results standpoint. So it's just necessary to keep watching over the trends and learning new stuff. Because like my case, I'm a producer, but I'm struggling to find concept artists. But here is DALL-E. That means that for me as a producer, I can speed up or work on my concepts, because instead of spending a month with concept artists to get super detailed concept which is going to sell my concept, I can work with DALL-E, generate pictures which is going to sell the atmosphere, sell the mood. It's not necessary we'll put it in the game, but see, this is something that helps me to speed up the decision process. Same comes for the concept artist. They can take DALL-E, they can generate something and overpaint it into something that actually fits their needs. All of the tools which from the first glance looks scary, so okay, I will no job anymore because there is a new tool. Bullshit. In practice, that means that you can do your work faster. And that's it, and you can achieve the better results. So constant learning, looking around you, getting knowledge on the new practices, that's the must.
So what advice would you give? We kind of talked a lot about hard skills, soft skills, constant learning, passion, kind of the themes that we had in our conversation. If you're speaking with new recruits, if you're speaking with people who are just getting into this industry, what advice would you give them? Like if you were to summarize everything we talked about today.
Get feedback as early as possible. Whatever you're doing, get feedback as early as possible. You just wrote a few lines about the new concept, show it to someone. If it doesn't click, if you do not receive any feedback, maybe you should rework it somehow. Or you have finished, you're about to finish the vertical slice of your game or the prototype. Test it as early as possible. It might be semi-ready. It might have gray boxes. It might have missing effects, sounds whatsoever. The earlier you test it, the more insights and the more feedback you'll get. And it comes not only to the game, it comes to your knowledge, the way you're writing emails, the way you're building your spreadsheets, if you're building the spreadsheets, anything. Feedback is a must. Rely on it.
Cool. Thank you, Slava. It was very insightful.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks for enjoying another episode of the 80 Level Roundtable podcast. Check out upcoming episodes on the 80 Level website at 80.lv. Join our career site at 80.lv/RFP. And share our podcast with friends and on your social networks.